The past returns in a flash of neon nostalgia, blending the warmth of old memories with the electric energy of the modern age. Join us as we revisit the moments that shaped us through a glowing, high-contrast lens. Subscribe today and rediscover the magic hidden in the flickering lights.
Turkey was already on the table when my brother looked across at me and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Still doing that little website thing?" I didn't answer right away. I picked up my glass of water, took a slow sip, and set it back down. My sister-in-law was watching me with that particular expression she always wore at family gatherings, half pity, half satisfaction. My mother was arranging rolls in a basket like she hadn't heard anything. My father was already nodding at my brother like the question was perfectly reasonable, like I was 22 and drifting, not 29 and 3 years into something I had quietly, methodically, built from nothing. "Something like that," I said. "That was Thanksgiving. The last one I spent at that table. I need to back up, because none of this makes sense without understanding where I started. I grew up in a suburb of Columbus, Ohio, in a house where success had a very specific shape. My brother got into Ohio State on a partial athletic scholarship, studied finance, got a job at a regional bank before he even graduated. My parents talked about him the way people talk about a hometown team that finally won something, proud, loudly to anyone who asked. I studied graphic design at a smaller state school. That was the first mark against me in their accounting. Not a bad school, a good school, actually, but not the right school, not the school with the name that landed well at dinner parties. I graduated with a decent portfolio and a clear idea of what I wanted to do, which was to build something for small business owners who couldn't afford agency rates but still needed to look professional. A platform. Design tools, templates, brand kits, the kind of thing that a woman opening a bakery in rural Indiana could actually use without hiring a $10,000 contractor. My parents heard website and stopped listening. For the first 2 years after graduation, I worked out of my apartment in Columbus. I had a part-time job at a print shop 3 days a week to cover rent and groceries. The other 4 days were entirely mine. I was up at 6 most mornings. I taught myself basic coding from free online courses, watched tutorials until my eyes hurt, rewrote the same landing page 11 times before I felt like it said what I needed it to say. I had around $400 in my savings account when I launched the first version. I didn't tell my family when I launched. There was no announcement, no celebration dinner, no proud phone call. I had learned, slowly and somewhat painfully, that sharing early-stage things with them was its own kind of risk. Not because they would steal anything, because they would diminish it. My father had a way of asking practical questions. How much are you making? Who else is doing this? What's your backup plan? That wasn't really curiosity. It was a slow, methodical dismantling. My brother had learned it from him. My sister-in-law had adopted it like a second language. So I kept it quiet. I worked. I got my first 10 paying subscribers in the second month, which felt like winning an Olympic medal and also like absolutely nothing at all because I knew how far I had to go. By month 6, I had 112. By the end of year 1, I had just over 1,000, and I was making enough to quit the print shop. I didn't tell them that either. The issue with keeping secrets from your family is that silence looks like shame. And I understood, distantly, that my silence read to them as confirmation that nothing was happening. At holidays, they stopped asking about my work with genuine interest, if they ever had, and started using it as a kind of shorthand. Still figuring things out? Have you thought about going back for a master's? Once, my mother pulled me aside before Easter dinner to ask, very gently, whether I needed money. She framed it as concern. I knew it wasn't only that. I said no. I was fine. I had actually just crossed 2,000 subscribers the week before. The Thanksgiving I mentioned at the beginning was year 3. By then, my platform had around 14,000 subscribers. I had just signed a partnership with a small business association in the Midwest that was going to bring in about $60,000 over the next calendar year. I had 2 part-time contractors working for me remotely, one handling customer support and one helping with content. I had incorporated the business, had a proper LLC, had a business checking account, and had just moved into a 1-bedroom apartment in a slightly nicer neighborhood in Columbus. None of that was visible at the Thanksgiving table. I was just sitting there in my sweater, picking at stuffing while my brother made the little website thing comment and my father nodded along. I said something like that and left it there. 2 weeks after Thanksgiving, I found out my credit score had dropped 41 points. I want to be precise about what that felt like. I checked my credit monitoring app on a Tuesday morning with my first cup of coffee, the way I did most mornings, because I had worked hard to build decent credit from scratch, and I tracked it carefully. 41 points is not a rounding error. That is a cliff. I put my coffee down and spent the next hour going through everything line by line. There was a credit card account I did not recognize. It had been opened 8 months earlier. The address on the account was my parents' house in Columbus, where I had not lived since I was 19. The name on the account was mine. The balance was a little over $9,000. I sat very still for a long time. I want to be honest about what I felt in that moment, because it wasn't rage, not yet. It was something more like grief. The particular, specific grief of having the thing you feared most confirmed. Because I knew, the moment I saw that address, exactly what had happened and who had done it. I called my bank first, then a credit attorney I found through a referral from a business contact. She was patient and thorough and did not seem surprised by anything I told her. She explained my options clearly: dispute the account with the credit bureaus, file a police report, pursue civil remedies. I asked her what she recommended. She said that depended on how far I wanted to take it and whether I was prepared for what that process would look like with family members involved. I told her I wanted to do everything correctly and completely. I did not want shortcuts. The credit card had been opened in my name by my brother. This came out through the dispute process, through documentation the bank eventually provided. He had my social security number. I had given it to him years earlier when he offered to help me refinance a small personal loan, which I now understood was a favor designed to create access rather than help. He had used my information to open the account, used it for what the statements showed were entirely personal purchases: a golf trip, home appliances, a down payment installment for a boat he and my sister-in-law had bought. A boat. My credit score had dropped 41 points so my brother could buy part of a boat. I did not call my parents. I did not call my brother. My attorney filed the dispute, and I filed a police report, and then I went home and cooked dinner and watched a documentary about deep-sea fish and tried to sleep. I was not entirely successful at the last part. Here is what I want to say about the months that followed, because I think people sometimes expect this kind of story to have a dramatic confrontation scene early on, a kitchen table reckoning, voices raised, truth laid bare. That is not what happened. What happened was quieter and slower and, in some ways, harder. I kept working, I kept building. The partnership with the Small Business Association launched in January and performed better than projected. I brought on a third contractor. I started getting inquiries from outside the Midwest, businesses in Tennessee, in Arizona, in upstate New York. I raised my subscription prices slightly and lost about 8% of my base and gained 12% in the following quarter. I was learning, in real time, how to run a company, which is not something anyone teaches you and which is mostly a sequence of mistakes made at increasing scale. The legal process moved at its own pace, which is to say slowly. My brother retained an attorney when the dispute documentation reached him. There were letters, then a mediation session, then more letters. My sister-in-law stopped inviting me to things, which was fine because I had not been going anyway. My mother called me twice to ask if we could work something out as a family, by which she meant drop it. I told her, both times, that I had every intention of seeing the process through. My father called once. He told me I was tearing the family apart. I said I hadn't opened the credit card. He didn't have an answer for that. We stayed on the phone for another 30 seconds in silence before I said I had to go, and I did. 14 months after I filed the police report, the civil case settled. My brother paid back the $9,000 plus legal fees and court costs. The total came to just over $16,000. He did not go to jail. He was not charged criminally. My attorney told me the DA's office had discretion and chose not to pursue it. I will not pretend that didn't frustrate me. But the debt was settled, my credit report was corrected, and the fraudulent account was removed. I'm telling you this part first because I think it's important to establish what actually happened and why, before I get to the other part of this story. Because the other part is what people tend to focus on, and I didn't want it to overshadow the thing that mattered most to me at the time, which was simply being believed, being taken seriously, having the facts on my side and using them. Now, the other part. In February of the year the case settled, I was contacted by a journalist at Inc. magazine. She had found my platform through a profile another outlet had done on women-owned tech startups in the Midwest, and she wanted to do a longer piece. We did 3 interviews over 2 months. She was thorough and specific and asked good questions. The piece ran in April. I did not think it would be a particularly big deal. I thought it might bring in some new subscribers, maybe some partnership inquiries. I had modest expectations, which is to say I had learned over 3 years to protect myself from my own optimism. The piece ran on a Thursday. By Friday evening, my subscriber count had increased by 3,000. By the end of the following week, I had been contacted by 2 venture capital firms, one small business advocacy organization that wanted me to speak at their annual conference, and a product manager at a company I will not name, but whose tools I had used and admired for years, who said they were interested in exploring an integration partnership. I sat in my apartment on a Sunday afternoon and looked at my laptop screen and thought about that Thanksgiving table, my brother and his little website thing, my father nodding, my mother arranging the rolls. I didn't call anyone. I made a cup of tea and answered emails until midnight. Over the following 18 months, the company grew faster than I had infrastructure to handle, which created its own set of problems that are genuinely boring to describe but involved a lot of late nights and a hiring process I was not fully prepared for, and 2 separate conversations with my attorney about restructuring the LLC. I moved into a larger apartment. I bought a used car that ran reliably, which was more than I could say for the previous one. I started sleeping better mostly. I was not in contact with my family during this time. My mother sent occasional texts, holidays, my birthday, to which I replied briefly and without warmth. My brother sent nothing. My sister-in-law sent a friend request on a platform I don't use, which I noticed and did not accept. Then, about 2 years after the Inc. piece ran, my platform was acquired. I am not going to give you the exact number because that is information I am not yet comfortable sharing publicly, and my attorney would also prefer I didn't. What I will tell you is that it was a number that would have sounded fictional to the version of me who sat in that print shop 3 days a week trying to get to 400 subscribers. It was a number that meant I would not have to worry for a very long time in ways I had spent most of my adult life worrying. I found out the deal had closed on a Wednesday. I was sitting in a conference room in downtown Columbus with my attorney and my accountant and 2 people from the acquiring company's legal team. When we finished signing, I shook hands with everyone, walked out to the parking garage, sat in my car, and cried for about 15 minutes. Not sad crying. The other kind. The kind that doesn't have a clean name. I called my best friend, who had been listening to me talk about this company for 3 years and who reacted with appropriate enthusiasm, and then immediately asked if I wanted to come over for dinner, which I did. I did not call my parents. Here is how they found out. The acquisition was covered in a local Columbus business journal first, then picked up by a couple of regional outlets, standard coverage, deal terms not disclosed, founder profile, that kind of thing. I had done a short interview with the business journal because my PR contact said it was worth doing, and I had agreed. My mother saw it. She called me the same evening the piece went online. I let it go to voicemail. The message was long and warm in a way that made me tired. She was proud. She had always known. She wanted to have dinner. She hoped we could put the past behind us. I listened to the voicemail twice, standing in my kitchen, and then I put my phone face down on the counter and finished making dinner. My father called the next day. My brother texted 3 days later, the first contact in over 2 years, with a message that said, "Congrats, really." 2 words and then a period that felt like it had been typed very carefully. I did not respond to any of them for several weeks. I want to be honest about why. I was not ready, and I was also genuinely uncertain what I wanted to say. I had not spent the previous 3 years fantasizing about this moment. I had spent them working. The acquisition did not feel like revenge. It felt like an outcome, like a result of a series of decisions I had made and work I had done, and what my family thought about it was genuinely secondary information. But I also knew I couldn't stay silent indefinitely. I had my own reasons for wanting some kind of closure that didn't involve simply disappearing from my family forever, even if that family had earned my distance. So about a month after the acquisition closed, I called my mother back. The conversation was shorter than she probably expected. I told her I had heard her message. I told her I was well and that I was glad she had seen the news. I told her I was not ready to have dinner and I was not sure when I would be. And then I said something I had thought about for a long time, which is that I did not need her to be proud of me now. That I had needed that a long time ago, and it hadn't been available, and I had eventually figured out how to move forward without it. I said it without anger because I wasn't angry anymore. I was something quieter than that. She cried. I let her. I said I would be in touch. I have not yet had that dinner. Maybe I will one day, when enough time has passed and I feel ready for whatever version of that conversation would actually be useful. Maybe I won't. I genuinely don't know. What I do know is that the decision is entirely mine, and there is a particular kind of freedom in that, in understanding, finally and completely, that I don't need their timeline or their approval or their revised retroactive pride. I built something real. I did it with my own money and my own time and my own decisions, in an apartment where I sometimes ate cereal for dinner because I was too tired to cook, in the hours before and after a job I worked to pay rent while I built the thing I actually wanted to build. No one in my family helped. Several people in my family actively made it harder, and still, the company exists, the acquisition happened, the number in my account is real. My brother wanted to know if it was still that little website thing. It was. There's a moment I keep coming back to, not the day the acquisition closed, not the conference room or the handshakes or the drive home. It's an earlier one, me at a kitchen table in a print shop uniform opening a laptop at 11 at night, rewriting a landing page for the 8th time because it still wasn't saying the right thing. Nobody knew I was doing that. Nobody was watching. And that, I've come to understand, is exactly the point. The things my brother did, using my social security number, opening that card, charging a golf trip and a boat down payment to my name. Those choices had a logic to them. He had always operated in a world where shortcuts were available and consequences belonged to other people. That is not a moral failure that appeared overnight. It built slowly, over years, out of being told that his outcomes mattered more than other people's foundations. What you practice, you become. He practiced taking, and eventually that is what he was. I don't say that with satisfaction. I say it because I think it's true and because understanding it helped me stop being angry. The settlement wasn't justice in any profound sense. It was just accounting. The real thing I walked away with wasn't the $16,000. It was the clarity that comes from doing the right thing when it would have been much easier and far less painful to let it go. What I had to learn, slowly, without anyone teaching me, was how to think clearly under pressure. How to read a balance sheet at midnight when I was scared. How to find an attorney through a cold referral and ask her the right questions. How to separate emotion from decision-making when both my parents were calling and my brother had lawyered up, and the whole thing felt designed to make me feel small enough to quit. Intelligence isn't a fixed thing you're born with. It's a practice. It's what happens when you refuse to stop thinking carefully just because the situation is hard. And then there is the third thing, which is harder to name but which I felt most clearly during the years. Nobody was watching. The discipline of showing up to something when you have no external reason to. No audience, no approval, no momentum. Just the work and your own decision to keep doing it. My family didn't believe in what I was building. That was genuinely painful. But it also clarified something. I was not building it for them. I was building it because I believed it was worth building. That belief, maintained quietly over 3 years of cereal dinners and late nights and slow subscriber counts, is the only reason any of the rest of it happened. My mother called to say she was proud, and I understood, standing in my kitchen listening to her voicemail, that her pride was real, and also that I had stopped needing it somewhere along the way. Not because I hardened something steadier to stand on. You don't get to skip the part where you do the work in the dark. That part is the whole thing.